Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Magai Majok Gak, and I'm a sophomore at Georgetown University in Qatar. As conveners, Georgetown University facilitates these discussions in line with our long-standing speech and expression policy. Here are a few important reminders. First, Q&A policy. Questions will be welcomed at designated time. To submit a question, please scan the QR code found on the notebooks and signed holders, and use the provided format when submitting your questions. Second, participants are free to use the information shared in these discussions. Still, out of respect for our speakers and to encourage open and honest dialogue, no attributable comments should be disclosed. This session, Screening Sudan, explores how documentary and narrative cinema capture the affective and political dimensions of Sudanese life. In the face of erasure and fragmentation, film becomes a vital tool for preserving memory, bearing witness to violence, and envisioning collective futures, creating space for alternative archives and public dialogue. Our moderator for this session is Bentley Brown, a filmmaker and scholar whose work explores themes of disidentification, language, and artistic translations of science. A Berlinale and Durban talent, as well as an Africa Movie Academy Award nominee, his films include Guardian of the Well, Revolution from Afar, and Faisal Goes West, which opened the inaugural Sudan Independent Film Festival in Khartoum. He currently serves as an assistant professor of media communication at the American University of Sharjah. Please join me in welcoming Bentley Brown and our esteemed panelists to begin today's discussion.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to Screening Sudan, which could also be watching Sudan, enjoying Sudan while eating popcorn, maybe streaming Sudan. There's a lot of versions of our talk today which will revolve around the role of filmmaking and cinema. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Eiman Hussein, Dr. Suzi Mirgani. Do I say Dr. Rafa Renas also? We discovered a medical background. My dad's a doctor, so that counts for something. And honorary Dr. Ibrahim Mursal. Please join me in welcoming our participants. Ibrahim Mursal is replacing Brahim Snoopy, who sadly was not able to get, I think, entry, although he happened to be at the airport this morning. He was still waiting for the visa. Okay. But we said, is there someone in the audience whose name happens to be involved Brahim? And we found one. Brahim is thank you, Ala. Brahim is a filmmaker, and we're delighted to have you join us in this last minute fashion. I'd also like to thank Georgetown University. This is my alma mater. I did my master's in communication, culture, and technology at Georgetown in the United States. And thanks to Suzi Mirgani, I filmed screened a film of mine, Revolution from Afar, here a few years ago, and also had a screening in Georgetown with the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. So thank you, Georgetown. Oh, wow. I did the thing where I accidentally threw my notes to the deleted inbox here we go. Oh my God. Okay. On a November 2024 evening in Kigali, Rwanda, a screening of Mohamed Kordofani's Goodbye, Julia opened a week of films, talks, and musical performances under the moniker Aflam Sudan. Organized by Rafa Renas and Ibrahim Snoopy, the itinerant series set up camp for its second edition. The first one had taken place in Nairobi 6 months prior, playing to an audience of mostly Sudanese university students, filmmakers, and families who fled the war in Sudan to resettle, at least temporarily, in Kigali. Sudanese musician Asim Al-Taib was playing a classic on the ouds, Eiman Hussein's Habib al-Ruh. خلاص اتجمعوا القلبين خلاص اتوحدوا الأمالين وأصبحنا رغم البين روح واحدة في جسدين. In addition to hearing live Sudanese music, it was also the first time for many to see Sudanese films on the big screen since leaving Sudan. And in a few cases, maybe the first time to see Sudanese films on a screen ever. Even somewhere such as Kigali, the cultural representation of Sudan felt all the more urgent as its archives are threatened by active war. So those lyrics from the Eiman Hussein song, at last the two hearts have met, at last the two hopes have united. We have become, despite the distance between us, one soul in two bodies. The song itself alludes to a duality experienced by many filmmakers today. For over 2 years, war between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces has forced millions from Sudan into a category they often wouldn't otherwise choose: diaspora. I do recommend reading Hamid Nafisi's Accented Cinema. It's an amazing book talking about the sort of nuances of different diasporic or exilic experiences by filmmakers. The recent Sudanese features most likely to be conjured up in the audience's mind today: Amjad Abul Ala's You Will Die at 20, ستموت في العشرين, Mohammed Kordofani's Goodbye Julia, Wada'an Julia, as well as Suzanne al-Marghani's Cotton Queen. What's the Arabic title? Malkat al-Gudun. Malkat al-Gudun Zadeh. We're all directed, a round of applause, which just premiered at Venice Film Festival, by the way. I don't know how you pull it off. Premiering in Venice and organizing this lovely space. Amazing. Thank you, Suzi. We're all directed by individuals living at least part-time outside Sudan. All have something to say about social issues, the trauma of the past, and hope for future generations in Sudan. Critically speaking, we have many questions that emerge from this. Is the filmmaker somehow at fault for not living in Sudan or shooting in Sudan? What about a film that does not address the current war? Is there some kind of a ethical obligation or responsibility to do so? And what about the question of audience? Who are these films for? Are they for Sudanese audiences? Are they for international audiences? These are really interesting questions that we'll dive into during today's discussion. So let's go ahead and do that. Start the discussion off. I would love to hear from our speakers in regards to the first question. You're also welcome to intro yourself a bit or to bring up anything you think would be important for the audience to know about your work. Looking at this question of films and their role in the archive and the greater discourse around Sudanese cinema, it's tempting to look at the situation of filmmakers in our current era having to navigate international co-productions. If you want money to make your feature film, unless I'm ready to be proven otherwise, but you need funds from somewhere. You need money from some other source. Often that source is a European co-producer. It's some kind of a festival fund that funds filmmaking that could happen in Sudan. And most recently, the Gulf. We also have Red Sea Film Fund. We have the Doha Film Institute and others who play a role in funding films. Our filmmakers today navigate these questions of Arabness versus Africanness, and how do we represent Sudanese films to the various audiences in the region as well as around the world. We tend to think that the filmmakers today are in a unique place, but as Dr. Eiman will point out, maybe it's not necessarily the case that filmmakers historically have also engaged in the same exact questions. So what can we learn from past generations of Sudanese filmmakers and the ways they navigated these systems in terms of funding, the European gaze, framing, the way that you frame Sudanese cinema? Dr. Eiman.
Thank you, Ben. It's automatic technology. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm really thank you, Bentley. I really want to first of all begin by, as everyone, sort of like really thanking Georgetown University for creating this really, really important space. And a heartfelt thank you to Suzi and all the amazing team who have really organized and curated such a powerful program over these 3 days. It's been a space of learning, connection to people and feeling and to dialogue. And it means a lot to be here. Yeah, that's first thing. And I also want to honor all the martyrs that have of this war in Sudan. And so I want to come to this conversation really through a personal as well as archival thread, which might sort of like try to respond to some of your questions, Bentley. Very recently, maybe about 2 weeks ago, one of my father, so I'm the daughter of Hussein Sharif, and for those who may not know him or his works, he was a multidisciplinary artist, a filmmaker, a painter, and intellectual. He died in 2005 in exile. And he was one of the second generation of filmmakers in the Sudan. And the huge amount of his life was between London, Al Khartoum, and Al Qahira. So I want to start with that recently one of his key films, The Dislocation of Amber, was restored. It was through a project we are collaborating with Cinematech Cairo and Sudan Film Factory. And for those who do not know what restoration is, it's a delicate work of treating a film and repairing and restoring the sound and color. But it's also profoundly symbolic work. Similar to, it's like a rebirth. This film was 50 years ago. It was done in 1975. And today, this year, 2025, it's been restored. So it's a really big and significant thing. And I want to invite sort of like really the dislocation of Amber. The significance of it was that when my father filmed the film in Sawakin, it was already, when he visited the city, it was already, Sawakin was in ruins. It was abandoned after a history of colonialism, slavery, shifting economies, but also huge violations. And he saw through Sawakin, Sudan. That's what he narrates in one of his interviews. And he turned the film into a poetic meditation on time, a body, spiritual Sufism, and memory. And the architecture of Sawakin speaks of colonial exploitation. But they also carry the beauty and endurance of our Sudanese history. The film is experimental, poetic, and layered. An artistic vision. And for me, it really shows how cinema can turn rubble into testimony, silence into expression, and the ugly into beauty. But also, what's really important about this is that here we are now again, but this time instead of one city, it's many cities, and huge destruction, huge death. The rubbles of cities that are destroyed, archives that have been lost, and massive displacement, which is really a humanitarian crisis that is really unprecedented. And it's a really painful symmetry to think of the dislocation of Amber as an ode to Sawakin, but also to look at Sudan today, 50 years later. And it raises a really painful and essential question. What does it mean to be living, breathing in these times? What does it mean to be Sudanese? What does home mean to us? And what does it mean to make art, where there is so much death and devastation around us? And at a personal level, film reminds me that even in ruins, there is memory, and that memory must be carried forward. I think the artist, Descartes says, "I think, therefore I am." I think the artist says, "I feel, therefore I am." And I imagine, therefore I am. I create, therefore we are. Because art has always spoken to the pulse of the nation. But also these filmmakers of the second generation, it was a time where they came, it was experimental filmmaking. Yeah. And they came with the challenges, and how they narrated or reflected on the realities was through use of metaphor, through ways of trying to deliver messages, which is a very different. I imagine it's quite different from the now, but I guess the struggles that they struggled. I mean, I see my father. I've seen how much he struggled. I've seen how finding funds. He paid with his own money a lot of the times for the films, and I think the challenge was, I think it was helpful in the 70s because there was the support of, because Ibrahim Mursal was a part of the the Sudan, the Ministry of Culture, and so it was a very different sort of. There was facilitation. I don't imagine there is no facilitation now, and there's a whole sort of like killing of the cultural project in Sudan. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eiman. And before we continue to Suzi, thanks, sir. We will continue with the podcast momentarily. I'd like to thank our sponsor, After Memory, Ma Ba'da Dhakira from Local Sudan. I'm just kidding. It's not our actual sponsor. But this is the book they talked about in the previous panel. It is a gorgeous collection of essays around the question of archiving Sudan. So thank you here in the front row. I see you guys. I see you. Yes. And now we move past the mic to Suzi. We've talked about this before. I find your position here extremely interesting. You're premiering a film at Venice. You're organizing this conference here on behalf of Georgetown. It's an incredible multi-hyphenate achievement. And always, ملكة البطن. تبكوني يا جماعة شو ده؟ And I would like to actually ask you something about your own style of filmmaking. Dr. Eiman mentioned this idea of working through metaphor. A few weeks ago, we had a call, and you talked about your love for magic realism. And I've always found your approach to filmmaking very striking and very bold. Could you give us a little bit of background on your journey to the magic realism and how you approach this question of cinema?
Yes, thanks for the question. But I mean, going back to your archive question or conversation, it's film is archive, right? So, and especially in the Sudanese context, we have so few films made in Sudan that really capture the landscape, whether it is the natural landscape or the cityscapes or the urban built environment. And so we have these documents. There's not enough of them. We do have a lot of documentary, much more than fiction. But even going back to the British colonial documentation of the country, all of this was done. Like film and politics are so intertwined in the Sudanese context. The first film was made in Sudan by British colonizers on the eve of the Battle of Durman in 1898. So you're talking about film coming to Sudan, colonialism coming to Sudan at exactly the same time. And this was at the birth of cinema. So imagine the birth of cinema and the birth of colonialism in Sudan, second round, I should say, with Kitchener, was capturing Sudan in reality and capturing Sudan in imagination and capturing Sudan on film. So when you see those three forces really wrapped together, you start understanding how important representation is, how important cinema is. And I don't know if you know this, but the Battle of Durman in the British colonial consciousness back then was spectacular. There were films, there were plays. I've been doing a lot of archival research, so if anyone knows more and more about this, please let me know. About theater plays in London, staged in London. People were waiting by the telegraph office to hear news of the British colonizers taking over the Battle of Durman. So it's been the history of Sudan and the history of cinema and the history of the politics of cinema have been intertwined throughout Sudanese history. So that's the start, and then we get through the colonial years. I'm sorry, I know I'm probably already over time, but we get through the colonial years, and Sudan is only ever represented through a colonial lens, through a British specifically colonial lens, and it's only at independence that we're able, through works like your fathers, Hussein Sharif, and through works like Jadallah Jubaras, and through works like this generation, older generation of filmmakers, to really understand how a Sudanese filmmaker represents Sudan. And in fact, there's an entire generation of Sudanese filmmakers that are now in exile in Egypt. And I wouldn't even say exile. They had fled their homes to Egypt with the onset of the war, leaving behind their archives, leaving behind their negatives, leaving behind their scripts. So they are living archives. They themselves, these older generation of men, are living archives themselves. And whoever here is in the room who is interested in archives and who is interested in learning more about them, I urge you to interview them now.
More on magic realism later. Rafa, I don't even know where to begin with you. You are Aflam Sudan, along with Snoopy, who couldn't make it today. Maybe you want to offer something from your experience in that area.
Hi everyone. So just to go back to the first question. For the archive, I think in Aflam Sudan is a touring film festival born because of the war. But what we're doing right now is we're creating an online platform which we collect all the Sudanese films, all of it in one place. When we have a poster, positive reviews, director information about it. So when you want to know about the Sudanese film, you can just go to the website, because a lot of people don't know how many films we have and what they talk about. Of course, you're not going to see the films, but you will know everything about the Sudanese film. And 2 days ago, I just discovered there were 6 films that I don't know about. So we're working on this.
Incredible. Ibrahim, welcome to the panel. Anything you'd like to jump in here on this first question? How have you accessed Sudanese film in the past? How has that informed your work as a practicing filmmaker?
First of all, thank you to Georgetown. Thank you to you, Bentley, and Susanna. And yeah, thanks to Ibrahim Snoopy and his work. It's a stark reminder, me sitting here, him not being here, of the reality facing Sudanese artists today. Travel, the practical question of travel, which was difficult for all Sudanese before, is now becoming this very hinder of movement. As a filmmaker, I think it's also a question of the definition of Sudanese cinema. As both speakers before me were talking about the rarity of Sudanese film, which in my mind translates to the question of visual language. I feel, did we have a chance to, as a Sudanese collective of filmmakers, historical collective of filmmakers, to develop our own film language? So all these works of archiving, of collecting these films, I think it's very important not just to record and archive the history, the movements, but also to give us filmmakers working today the opportunity to watch these films and see the similarities, the ways of approach, and help us develop or reaffirm a common visual language. I grew up with Bollywood films, and it's so incredible when you watch all these films. You realize there is a visual language present in all of these films. Watching, especially the new wave of films, Susanna's films, Amjad's films, and Kurdufani and Sohaib Dasmaltari, talking about trees, trying to identify what are the similarities, not in topics, not in ways of making, but in the approach to visual language, which is a question I always think we should be reflecting on more.
Excellent point, which conveniently ties into our next question. In the words of filmmaker Muhammad Hanafi, he talks about how I asked him, well, what about this question of target audience? Like, who are your films for? And does that change as you now have to move somewhere else? You're having to relate that film idea as you pitch it in a film market to an audience of people from East Africa or from the Gulf or from Europe. And then you have to follow through and make the film. And at the end of the day, is it still a quote unquote Sudanese film? Is it made for people in Sudan? What if they don't have access to the film in Sudan? And his response about this question of target audience and translation and language was, it is at the end of the day a work of visual language, right? And I'm communicating through something that we aspire to be universal in some sorts. So I find it very interesting to think about. Let's bring it back to Aflam Sudan here, and everybody is welcome to join in. We're welcome to have this conversation flow as it needs to flow. And on behalf of Ibrahim Snoopy, who wasn't here today, he opened Aflam Sudan in Kigali last year by saying, I'm Ibrahim Snoopy, and I want to thank the haters. All right. And I'm like, there's haters out there. I don't know. I don't know who they are, but I respect all the work that you guys have done in Aflam Sudan. And if we have to thank the haters, let's thank the haters, because Aflam Sudan is definitely worth it. I really admire what you guys are doing. And Kigali was really kind of a unique experience. As you mentioned, Rafa, there were a lot of people in the audience who just sort of happened to be there. The previous series took place in Nairobi. And in Nairobi, there's a community of media practitioners and filmmakers and people maybe coming to this festival who have attended other film festivals before. Not necessarily the case in Kigali. A lot of university students who moved there after the war, families who relocated to Kigali as well. And I had a very interesting conversation with a group of university students following the screening of Goodbye, Julia. And one of them was very adamant in saying, الأفلام ديل ما لنا نحن سودانيين. These films are, my job is to try to confuse the translators in the back over there as much as possible. These films are not made for Sudanese people. I mean, they asked me my opinion first, and it didn't matter what I said. They were going to like dive in and say, yep, these aren't Sudanese films. At the same time, there's this interesting realization by a lot of people in Kigali that there is such thing as Sudanese cinema. Many of them were shocked that there were, at the time, 27 films, I think. And you said there's more, we don't have time to program them, right? How do you respond to this question of target audience, like this kind of approach? Is that true to you, or?
So that's a lot. I will try to answer it. So first, Aflam Sudan, we did 2 editions, as Bentley mentioned, one in Kenya, another one in Rwanda. Even the purpose change it, not just the audience. In Kenya, we were looking for a political, that was like for us a political statement to say, stop the war in Sudan, talk about Sudan, talk about the war, and it just kept changing. We just discovered that this touring film festival is bigger than us. It's like a community healing event when people just watch themselves and finally have access to Sudanese cinema, which is what you just said. That was the first time for those students to watch Sudanese films. That was the first time ever. And that's why how they reacted to each film was big. يعني they were like, oh, we didn't know we have that much films. And what is this film about? How you can just change everyday live into a film, and they just saw themselves on the screen, and that was very magical. I think what happened during the festival, but as you said, between Kigali and Nairobi, the difference was huge. Even the reaction, and even us, me and Snoopy, why we founded this and how it kept getting bigger. So I think the target audience for each film, it doesn't matter. I'm focusing on the access. If films are being made for Sudanese or not non-Sudanese, the access of the Sudanese cinema should be reachable for people. So I'm trying to link the cinema with the people. So I'm kind of the link, and we love it.
Can I just ask, are the audience members people who had fled Sudan because of the war?
Yes, that's why I said it was a community healing event. That like people were actually just that was a moment for them to just to think about the war, and everyone was the refugee or displaced. It was hard for them. So the war was happening really fast. So we needed a moment to understand what was going on. So whatever the film was screened, not only about war or revolution, whatever it was, even a tea lady, people just cried, hugged each other. We needed that space, even me.
What about our other panelists? Do you have thoughts on this?
I mean, I'm just sitting with what you're saying, Rafa, because I think that is the reality. I think film is one way and of really reaching people, touching them in different ways, whether we're thinking about documentary and thinking about what is the reality and sort of like hard core facts, but also whether we're thinking about imagining and reimagining and the hopes for the future. It's also healing, because in one way the craving, now we're in this position where we are in, it's a craving and the yearning to remember and see and just sort of like be in this time, even if it's a short film or if it's a long feature film, it's the same. I want to feel, I want to go back and just sort of like be in Sudan, see the memories. And I don't think there's any film that I've been seeing since the war which hasn't made me cry.
So can I jump on that? So filmmaking itself as a communal act, right? So I think it's the one art form of all the art forms that has the most people involved in that one single project. From the cinematographers to the light, to the art directors, to the grips, to there's literally hundreds. It can be up to hundreds of people on set, and that is on set. That's not even the people who service the set. That's not the drivers or the cooks or the service staff. That it's an entire ecosystem, and it's an entire ecosystem that brings people together. And it's an entire ecosystem that creates a community even before the film has been made. So I think in times like this, of course, it's very difficult to make film. It's difficult to make films regardless of where you're making a film. But to make a film with Sudanese casts and crews now anywhere in the world is even doubly difficult.
Can I follow up, Suzi, with your experience with Cotton Queen? You had to pivot mid-production and change to another country because of the war. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and what that was like? What were the questions that you were dealing with?
Yes, I mean the point was to take a good budget, a healthy budget of this film to Sudan, right? So we don't have a film industry, but there are individual efforts that occur every now and again to take a substantial budget to Sudan, not only to make the film, but also to contribute to the community, to contribute to people who work in the arts, to contribute to artists. And of course, that was all derailed with the war. I held out as long as I could, waiting. At first we were told it will be 2 days. The war is going to be over in 2 days. It's going to be over in a week. It's going to be over in 2 weeks, and so on. And so at some point, we had to be realistic about it. And if we want to make this film, we have to make it elsewhere. And where do we make this film? We make this film where the actors are now seeking refuge, and that place was Egypt. That place was Cairo. So we moved on to make the film there.
I want to shift to Ibrahim and talk still about this idea of making films maybe outside Sudan versus inside Sudan. I think you're kind of in the middle of this right now, developing a feature film. Recently, just joining us from Al Ula with the Red Sea Film Feature Lab, I guess it's called now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very important, difficult, practical question, but also an artistic question of access to Sudan and the removal of that access. But also, I was developing this film before the war, and then the war happened, and of course, the entirety of the project, it's a film called The Price of Evil. It's in Arabic, جزاء السيئة, based on the Quranic verse, جزاء سيئة سيئة مثلها فمن عفا وأصلح فأجره على الله. And it deals with what happened after the revolution, some of the main questions that even became more prominent with the war, which is, I truly believe this war will end and we will return. So I'm not focused on the ending of the war and the process of return, but what comes after. The questions that will be asked of, okay, this war happened? What sense of justice will we be seeking, and will it be a reconstructive justice or a retributive justice? And the question of access to Sudan, filming in Sudan, of course, is a very practical issue, but also what period of Sudan, what time of Sudan? That was one of the questions I was working on quite literally two nights ago in Al-Ula. If we make a Sudan, if we base the film from 2019 until 2023, it's a very different film in terms of focus, in terms of accent, than if we base it in 2014. And with the war comes this interesting thing I've been feeling, and in talks with other Sudanese filmmakers, of the issue of presenting Sudan, representing Sudan, reflecting on Sudan. Presenting Sudan, this is who we are, type of films, type of stories. Representing Sudan, this is presenting Sudan, this is who we are. This is how it is. Representing Sudan, this is where we come from. But also the more interesting type of film, in my own personal opinion, which is reflecting on Sudan. These are our issues. These are the things that occupy our minds. With the war, suddenly the focus shifts on presenting and representing, naturally, because our entire identity is under attack. And now that we don't have an access to Sudan, filmatically, insurance companies just saying straight up no to you, it becomes also a question of, when I reflect on this film I'm making, what type of Sudan will I want to recreate on sets? A realistic representation of the Sudan we left, or a more interesting challenge of what could have been, what should have been, which are very interesting artistic questions. Unfortunately, the focus on presenting, representing, kinda, I feel, pushes me away from them, which is a very a struggle that every time I talk to other filmmakers, Sudanese filmmakers, it's kind of like a common issue facing us. Should we focus on what's happening now and kind of protecting what's happening now, or not protecting what's happening now, but protecting our identity? Or do we have the possibility, مسموح لنا, are we allowed to taking a step back and approaching it from other angles?
And I want to dig deeper on that question and add to that maybe a responsibility to talk about the war through cinema. And one common refrain we might hear is, يا أخي الحرب جاري عديد وانت عاملين أفلام عن واحد داير يتزوج. Translation, the war is ongoing and you're making films about one trying to get married. How do you respond to that? I mean, I think we have a lot of films here not necessarily set during the war, Rafa, as well, a filmmaker.
That's a great question. It reminds me of أيام الثورة, the revolution days, which was a question facing all the filmmakers. انتوا بتعملوا أفلام عن الثورة وبتقدموا الثورة أبطال السودانيين والسودانيات. And I remember talking to Amjad Abu Layla and several others, and there was this question of making films about the revolution and the timing of making those films. As a documentarian, a person who makes documentaries, of course, documenting reality, following the stories happening in front of us, that's a very it's a very sensible decision to make. But then there is the question of time. We need, or I need, and I feel as a collective, as a society, we need a distance of time to be able to correctly reflect on what has happened versus reflecting on something as it's happening. And I feel there is this pressure sometimes of, yeah, but let's reflect now. Let's talk about what's happening now, which is understandable, but somehow removes us from the very logical sense of, let's have some distance of time. So when we reflect, it can be a more أعمق. It can be a deeper sense of reflection. Unfortunately, the question of war also added to that. So it wasn't just the revolution that we were waiting to reflect on. Suddenly war comes in, and the revolution is just a faraway distance. So I don't know, honestly. That's the simple answer. I have no idea.
I think also I mean I think there's also sort of like thinking about the now and the pressures, but also I've also sort of like how my father, these issues and these challenges have been also from even from ages and ages ago. ما إنه أبوي كبير يعني لكن بس yeah, not like my father was old لكن بس yeah يعني maybe anyhow let's skip that part. So yeah, so I think that the issues of even filming يعني when his last unfinished film was of Dust and Rubies, this was in Cairo because he couldn't be in Sudan, and he was really searching and looking and navigating through areas in Egypt that were sympathetic to Sudan, that looked like Sudan, had the feeling of Sudan, and I think these are real challenges. Yeah, there, and they speak, and also but also the cinematic interpretation. How do you interpret the realities? He wanted to talk, he spoke about in his of the St. Rubis, he spoke about exile, but in speaking of it, it was through an in cinematic interpretation, using the poets of exile and really bringing that into life. So I think there's a pressure, but how do you reconcile with that as an artist? And I'm really curious about how you guys do it as filmmakers.
I think Rafa and Ibrahim are in the same situation now, trying to look for location, right? If you can talk.
Yes, but I just want to add something to what he said, that already there is a film already, Sudanese film already mentioned the war. It's been about the war, already a bunch of films about the revolution. It's actually a lot, which is amazing. And that's why you have a less pressure. You don't have to do it now. Take your time. But it doesn't matter, because when people watch all the films, they're really happy with whatever we do. And for the location part, yes, I'm looking for a place that's, I can say it's Sudan, but it doesn't look like Sudan, so we have to make it Sudan. But because I'm now displaced or a refugee in Kenya, I'm gonna make Kenya my Sudan for now, planning to film there next year.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, I will encourage the audience to scan the QR code and submit questions. I would normally do that. I think we already have a full iPad of questions here too, so I might start to sprinkle some of them into our conversation if you guys are cool with that. There's a very interesting question. It says, why have we noticed such a decline and decrease in Sudanese cinema? Speak for yourself. In comparison to Gaza, for example, who have been able to export movies from within Gaza internationally. So this might be a question about filmmaking coming out of Sudan physically, perhaps geographically, which is one that's very close to my heart. And we've even had interviews about this in the past. What about the prospect of making films inside Sudan, someone who's there, and getting those films out?
Well, they're being made. They're being made. I think the question is, how much of a budget film are you talking about? Are you talking about a film made on a handheld device? Are you talking about a film shot on your phone? Because those are being made on a daily basis. I know that Muhammad Fawi is running a workshop in Port Sudan, making films. So films are being made, and they exported as in uploaded to the internet, right? So films are being made. It's just what quality of film, what length of film, and what budget of film.
But access is important too. I mean, if we don't get to see them, if no one gets to see them, not to get too philosophical, but like, why do we make films?
Well, these films that I'm talking about are on YouTube.
And we actually screened 3 in Aflam Sudan, Rwanda.
There you go.
Bet. All right. So we asked that first question. Okay. Question 2. How can Sudanese cinema, both documentary and narrative, serve as an alternative archive that preserves collective memory and fosters public dialogue in the face of erasure and fragmentation? We've already been alluding to this a little bit, but now, can I please now get to magic realism, please? A little bit.
We're talking about the politics of art.
Everything's political. That statement is political.
That is true. Well, I mean, to actually bring it into the conversation, magical realism is alternative imaginings, right? So how would you? I mean, cinema for me is magic anyway, right? Just the act of making a film, producing a film, and then magically it appears on a screen.
Miracle.
It is a miracle in every sense of the word. But the magical realism element, I think, to tie it into the theme of this conference, is to reimagine, right? To imagine alternative Sudans. So the magical element for me is, if you want to make a realistic film, well and good, but you could also make a documentary. If you want to take fiction to another level, or if you want to really engage with the magic of cinema, then you can engage in magical realism.
Okay. Following up that, we have one for Mursal. What do you think a Sudanese visual language could look like, following up on your comments earlier? And I want to add to this as well. You have a short film called African Family Dinner, which, hopefully I'm not misquoting you here, intentionally has sort of nothing to do with Sudan, but everything to do with your experience. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So that's a great question, and a simple answer again is I have no idea. It's the question of how could the Sudanese visual language look for. I was thinking about the question of visual language with my short film African Family Dinner. It's a short comedy drama about the idea of performing identity, of trying to showcase your part of someone else's identity. And we've been lucky to be able to be traveling with this film all over the world. And
it's a hilarious film, by the way. Congrats. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's the reverse of like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner type thing, informed by personal experience.
Yeah, and the question was always, it's this white woman who meets this African man, and he invites her to meet his family for the first time. Of course, everyone is trying to impress the other party. A huge question we faced from the start was, what country is the family from?
By saying African, you're already generalizing.
Exactly.
That's part of your...
So it was like the specificity and the generalization of Africa as a country versus, no, this family is from a specific country. At the end, it became a practical answer. We had 5 actors, 3 of them were from Ghana. So it was like they're Ghanaian family. But the question of representing Sudan was then again presented, because everyone expected, you're Sudanese. The family will be Sudanese. It would have been the easier film for me to make because, yeah, I know how a Sudanese home looks like. I know the dynamics of a Sudanese family. But then it was again this question of presenting, representing, reflecting. I was like, nah. Although it will make my life easier, no, it's not going to be a Sudanese family. And I was like, why? Because I want for once to not actively be not constrained, but actively to do the expected, which is to represent Sudan and what's happening in Sudan with what's going on in Sudan. Interestingly enough, every Q&A in the film, Sudan comes up because the sensibilities, the visual choices I've made, everything is from Sudan, which then connects to the question, the beautiful question of what could Sudanese visual language look like. I think that's Aflam Sudan and the other filmmakers, what they're doing of collecting them together. I think that's the first step to answer that question, by watching several Sudanese films back to back. Then you suddenly start to see, oh, there are similarities. There are things happening in the same vein, not copies of each other, but ways of pacing. I would imagine all Sudanese film in some way have an interesting pacing in editing. We edit fast, and then slow. Fast, slow. It's the same musicality.
One of the editors in this room, right?
Yeah, we have Katab here, an editor. That's a question for actually the editors.
Katab yalla qum fok. This guy's amazing.
So it's a question I would ask filmmakers, other artists, visual artists, the visual language of Sudan. How is it?
We have a question specifically for Suzi. I think kind of we feed into it here. How did you as a director navigate the emotional and psychological impact of the war on both yourself and your Sudanese actors, all of whom have been displaced during the making of Cotton Queen, and I'll add in Egypt for context?
Yeah, it was very difficult for the actors. Some of them had moved there since the war, had fled since the war. Some had come earlier, some had come a little bit later. Some had seen more horror than others. But they really formed a support network amongst themselves. But it was, I mean, filmmaking is already hard, but to add the emotional toll on top of that was very difficult on a daily basis. I mean, sometimes in the morning we would have to start a little bit later, just to be able to get over the conversations that people were having. So it was more than just work. It was not just working towards the film. It was working towards this community of actors and cast members and crew members as well. But I think one small silver lining is that we built Sudan. We built a version of Sudan in Cairo, and this gave everyone really a great sense of hope, however temporary. That this was something active that they were doing. They were being active and creative, and making something together.
One of the questions is, as a filmmaker, do you feel it's more important to highlight Sudan sort of as is, or a reimagination of Sudan?
I mean, all film is a reimagination. All film, even documentary.
Period. Okay. Dr. Eiman, we have a question for you. What happened to the movie Abu Daoud? Tell us about the film, which is a documentation and preservation of Sudanese memory.
So Abu Dawood, it was in its editing process. We have retrieved everything, alhamdulillah, before the war, long before the war, and but the challenge, I think, how my father did not complete Abu Dawood is because he was filming the Southeast Nuba, the film. And he came back to Khartoum to learn that Abu Dawood had died, so they weren't able to complete the whole filming with him. It's there. We're hoping it will happen. Retrieving whatever we can of it. I mean, these are all projects that are to be in making. That's the reality. It's also about funding. It's also about finding the means and the ways to do it. And I think this is challenging, especially when the filmmaker is not there, when the filmmaker has died. What do you do? Because there's also the ethics of it. I don't think anyone can complete his film, but it's like, yeah, what do you do then?
Okay. Let's see. We've got a lot of really good questions here. In a country like Sudan, where cultural identity and political struggle are deeply intertwined, which we have touched on earlier, how can filmmakers balance telling authentic Sudanese stories, authentic, very dangerous word, while also reaching international audiences? What does that mean? Do we have the international audiences? And one of my theories is like, no matter how you try to strip the international gaze from your filmmaking, you can't, because subconsciously you're imagining where this film would go. And so often we're talking about distribution that involves things like international film festivals, potentially international funding structures. What does that look like? Yeah, balancing an idea of an authentic Sudan versus something that's maybe catering towards international gaze.
This reminds me of the earlier discussion of target audience. I don't think I have a very good answer to that, but I remember on the flight coming here, I watched the most amazing Saudi film I've ever seen. It's an incredible film called Hubal. I was watching on the flight here a Saudi film called Hubal. It's about a Bedouin family in the middle of Norway in Saudi Arabia. Incredible film, amazing film. And the reason it was so amazing and so incredible was how local the story was. This was a film who was not interested in any other gaze except the local Bedouin gaze. And that they made the film the most universal thing ever. I was reading the subtitles because I couldn't even understand the language, although it's supposed to be Saudi Arabic. But it was so universal, and that's always been my belief in funding. That's the problem. In funding meetings, that question comes: how will the audiences be able to not just understand, but have a response to your story? That's the nice way of saying your story is too local. Can you make it a little bit, generalize it? My answer is always the more local you go, the more universal you go. And the minute you start watering down your story, the more generalized it becomes, and basically you lose the intention, what made you actually pushed you to tell this story. But it's also a question of financiers, because they have power.
There's a strength in specificity. The second that you say, "Oh, I'm going to do this thing, it's universal, it'll appeal to everyone," you're going to lose the audience. But by digging into the details of the story that you want to tell, you actually wind up telling something that is more appealing to those audiences. But what about dealing with those funders? What if you have a co-producer who's never been to Sudan, and so every reference point you have for them is something that they find fascinating, and how do people deal with that, and you find yourself constantly having to pitch an idea to someone from the outside? What is there a compromise that's inevitable there?
I always say there is the film you sell on the pitch, and then there is the film you end up making. And honestly, you got to play the game. Those two films don't need to be the same film. So in pitches, give them the film they want to hear. Once you have the money, go for the film you want to.
I love it. At first I thought, yeah. At first I thought you said there's the film you sell on the beach. I didn't hear a pitch on the beach. I was like, man, I wish I was selling films on the beach. Okay. We do have a recurring question here, which is how to find Sudanese films, the ones that are already out there and being distributed. We have an amazingly diverse panel in terms of different points of access to film here. What are your recommendations? I want to hear from everyone here. How would you recommend someone today leaves this room and is able to access many of the films we've been discussing?
Attend the next Aflam Sudan edition, please. That's the only way. But there is 3 great Sudanese film on Netflix. This is the only way you can watch online. Asid, Goodbye Julia, and You'll Die in 20. That's the only Sudanese film.
Netflix, huh?
Yes, Netflix.
They just took it off.
Really? Come to Aflam Sudan. Now it's a must.
But what I thought you were talking about an online platform, though, because I was discussing this with someone last night. We're like, it'd be a really good idea to have a database, a platform for just Sudanese films.
Yes, this is an idea, but when we start Aflam Sudan, as I said, it was a way to find, for us, we are 2 filmmakers. We just wanted to talk about the war. It was a political statement. It was getting bigger. We didn't know what to do with it, but we just continue working. So now Aflam Sudan is, as I said, a way to archive all Sudanese cinema, a way to be like an alternative screening platform that give access to the local Sudanese people. As we all say, a cinema للشعب, but they don't have access. So it's now very important role we just find ourselves doing. A responsibility.
I also want to add the beauty of this space is gathering so many influential Sudanese people. We have archives, designers, visual artists, filmmakers, archivists. Please talk to each other. Let's make that platform. Hopefully there's someone rich here also who can finance it. So yeah.
Yeah. And we need your next film to screen it in Aflam Sudan.
You got it already. I'm going to send it.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. It's people who are in this audience can connect with each other to make this happen. I think that's very possible. And not just Sudanese. You know, we have a very diverse audience in Doha and Qatar. We have representatives from the Doha Film Institute here as well. I'm sure these are conversations that we can take further to service the Sudanese, not just the Sudanese community or audiences, but also international audiences.
Yeah, I think screenings and gatherings, because gatherings are really important, because there's something quite healing about the connecting with each other, as everyone has been saying.
Okay, and on that note, the idea of coming together, and Rafa, we had talked both in Nairobi and then later in Kigali as well, sort of seeing the significance, as you've already alluded to today, of a film screening series, of serving more than a purpose of just here's movies and yalla enjoy, but also creating a space to heal. There's a beautiful question here from the audience. They're all beautiful. They're all beautiful. Well, that was borderline Trump. They're all beautiful. Yes, I know. Trump's. I stop. خلاص ما أقول شيء. Do you think cinema can have a transformative or healing role in Sudan's future? So in a very, like, keeping it 100 cents right now, is it do films really play a role in transforming and healing, or no?
Yes, yes, yes. And I just discovered this by accident by doing Aflam Sudan, as I said, and it has the power of connecting everyone and healing and open a sensitive, important conversation in every subject every Sudanese person need. And imagine just screening films from different directors and bringing the Sudanese people. And after this, we have Q&As. Like, people are allowed to cry in every edition of Aflam Sudan. We always cry. That's a part of the healing. And it just gives you the power to see yourself and say what you have in your mind, regardless the film. So it's definitely, films have a power of healing. And as the conference is, politics through art. So I think that was what we did in Aflam Sudan and what we're doing.
Okay. Absolutely. Yes, I totally agree. I think that film has extraordinary power. Films are a reminder to us that memory endures, that stories endure, and that even in the rubble, art can imagine and hope for futures beyond destruction. It is survival, and I think it's hope itself.
Cool. Another question, and we'll wrap it up in a few minutes here. And just as a reminder to everyone, once this panel is finished, this is one of the ones where you stay seated, because we will be flipping the stage for the next and final conversation. Okay. Let's see. What is the biggest difficulty you've had to overcome in your line of work? What's the biggest challenge to you today? I'll sing a song while they think. أصبحنا رغم البين.
Well, there's so many. Like, how there are so many, but I would say in this current moment, it is the war. It's what's going on. It's what's going on, because it's not just about making the film. It's all the people that are involved in that film, scattered all over the world. You know, there was one of the actors in the film couldn't. So I have a short film that I made a feature film from, and I wanted to ensure that all the same actors were in the short were in the feature, and we couldn't have one of the actors because he couldn't travel. He was stuck in Durman. He was stuck in the middle of the war. He couldn't get a visa to Egypt. As a young man, the older women were able to get visas in the early days, but him, as a young Sudanese man, there is just no way for him to get a visa at that time. So the difficulties are multiple. But that's just one example.
You face no challenges, everybody here?
It's a great question. I think it's this, we have to also remember what was happening, what was going on before the war started, just to build on that. There was a momentum building up. and it always breaks my heart to think about the stoppage that happened to that momentum with the war. Films were happening, our Sudanese cinema was starting to have a name. There were several films in pre-production at that time, and films being thought of. Financiers, insurance companies. A lot of people think about financing and everything, but insurance companies are extremely important in actually creating a film, ensuring all the equipment. And finally, Sudan was becoming one of the countries where they're like, okay, we can actually insure the equipment going into Sudan. Finally, we were there, and it's a huge, huge thing for it to happen. Bam, war happens. It's over. So that loss of momentum, I think, is the most difficult thing, starting basically from the start. Again.
Rafa's looking at me like, Bentley, imta akbar صعوبة. What do we have? Maybe some closing thoughts as well.
Okay, so for me, I think what personally I'm facing right now, it's a bit of, if we can say, a surviving guilt. So I feel like I survived this, so that's why I made Aflam Sudan personally. So we just need to do more for Sudan. We just need to talk more. We just need to, have big noise for Sudan.
Yeah, I'd like to also acknowledge, I mean, the work that was done before the war. I mean, I think Sudan Film Factory also played a really big role in facilitating, in making, like even having a film festival there in Sudan. There was, I mean, we were in such a place, and especially if you think about the 70s were great and films were being made and experimental filmmakers. Come the 80s, and the censorship happened, cinemas started to be closed. It was like this sort of like a killing of the cultural project, what I said earlier. And then there was this whole big break, and then this sort of like revival, and now here we are again. It's like everything's gone back to some place, but I really want to acknowledge Sudan Film Factory, really.
Guys, thank you so much. This has been a delightful conversation. I am so grateful to you. I'm grateful to Georgetown, to our fake sponsor, Local Sudan. This amazing book. Please check it out, Ma Ba'da Thakira, After Memory. I have to give a shout out to Wahabi Abdel Fattah, front table over here, who hand carried Markub Jilid ya Jama'a from Atbara to this conference. Thank you. Guys, a round of applause one more time for our panelists. On the drums, Ibrahim Mursal. Bass guitar, Rafa Renas. Vocals, Suzi Mirgani. And lead electric, Ad-Dakora Eiman Hussein.
Thank you.